Move now to the last agenda item number 6 for this morning session. It's about objection or non-objection regarding products I'm not going to name here. We're going to have a joint procedure for these objections. The floor will be for the co-rapporteurs for the first objection, and the second will be for Joël Melin for the second objection, and then the shadows. So we start for the first objection with Jutta Paulus.
Yes, thank you, Pascal. And I do understand that you do not want to pronounce all the difficult chemical names. Dear colleagues, we are objecting against the Commission regulation amending the Annexes 2, 3, and 4 to Regulation 396/2005, because this amendment aims to set new maximum residue levels for a list of substances, including lufenerone. My objection aims at lufenerone only. For lufenerone, the Commission is proposing the raising of MRLs solely to avoid the so-called non-tariff trade barriers, the import of grapefruit, where the MRL is proposed to be raised by a factor of 30 from 0.1 milligram per kilogram to 0.3 milligram per kilogram, and sugarcane, where the MRL is suggested to be doubled. Those imports are coming from Brazil mainly. Before I go further into our reasoning, I would like to dwell a bit on lufenerone first. It's a benzoylurea pesticide. It inhibits the production of chitin, which is the outer shell of the insects, and it is used as pesticide and fungicide. The union approval of lufenerone expired on 31st December 2019, and as renewal of the approval was unlikely given the properties of the substance, no application for renewal was even submitted. So it is no longer approved at union level, but still it is exported as agri-food pesticide. Lufenerone meets the criteria for substances that are persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic as laid down in Annex 13 to the REACH regulation, and it was identified to have high potential to meet all Stockholm criteria for persistent organic pollutants. Therefore, in our view, even exporting such a substance stands in blatant contradiction to the goals of the Farm to Fork strategy, which aims not only at reducing amount and risk of pesticides in the EU, but it contains the following sentence, quote, "Therefore, efforts to tighten sustainability requirements in the EU food system should be accompanied by policies that help raise standards globally in order to avoid the externalization and export of unsustainable practices." And in our view, policies facilitating the export of dangerous pesticides to third countries do not help to raise standards globally. To the scientific basis for our objection, a recent report concluded that lufenerone can induce teratogenic effects and histopathologic changes to liver and kidney in rats. So this suggests that pregnant women and their fetuses could be at risk. Also, the exposure to pesticides, to insecticides, induces biochemical alterations, oxidative stress, and therefore maternal environmental exposure to chemical pollutants was recently ranked as the second most important cause of infant mortality in developing countries. Unfortunately, EFSA concluded in its opinion of 15th July 2020 that the increase of the MRLs for lufenerone is justified on the basis of the need to comply with normative values in Brazil. And EFSA omitted any consideration concerning the long-term cumulative effect of lufenerone on reproductive toxicity, developmental neurotoxicity, and the immunotoxic potential in when ingestion is continued for a long time. Therefore, we think that the draft Commission regulation gives rise to concerns regarding the safety of lufenerone on the basis of the precautionary principle, the data gaps related to the effect of lufenerone on public health, especially for pregnant women and for infants and for the environment. Therefore, we believe that absence of clear evidence should not be judged as evidence of absence, but that the precautionary principle should be respected, and therefore we're objecting to this proposal and suggest that the MRLs for lufenerone should remain where they are at the limit of determination. I will stop here to give my co-objectors, whom I thank very much for their support, the opportunity to add something. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jutta. Sirpa Pietikäinen, Christel Schaldemose, and Mick Wallace, who are the co-objectors, as you said, are not, unless I'm wrong, are not in the system participating remotely. So, of course, they can always join the debate a bit later on with the shadows and the catch the eye. So now we move to the second objection on the same products, led by Joël Melin. The floor is yours.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, we objected to a second substance of this package, presented in passing, as it were. This is a very anti-scientific approach from the Commission, presenting packages which are in fact bombs of cocktails of substances. We've seen that the evaluation done is still not satisfactory for us to determine this. The insecticide dealing with pulses in the US, chlorantraniliprole, is a product which, as far as we're concerned, is a real problem in terms of its fallout. In particular, because it is extremely water soluble. Basically, everything is heading in the same direction, but as you know, as we all know, all of the studies are not finished. We usually use the precautionary principle. There will be an effect on the pollinators, which is well documented, but which is certainly worth fleshing out. At the moment, no European farmer has asked for this product. This affects a growing sector, which is pulses. And in the new protein crop strategy, I mean plant proteins I'm talking about, given that, we need to have even greater precautionary approach. So we would ask for a serious caution in reviewing these MRLs, because what the Commission is asking for is no more, no less than 30 times, a change of times 30. So we would be against this, because this is not just for this product, but also we never talk about this, the cocktail effect, and we think it's irresponsible to drop this precautionary principle. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. I open the catch the eye, and I give the floor to the EPP and Christine Schneider.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, let me respond to the second substances, chloranpolynon. The scientific opinions have confirmed the safety of this for the health of the consumers, and that also concerns pollinators. It is allowed in Europe, and it's used as a pesticide in the EU, essentially in the area of legumes. This is just, of course, it's possible to reduce risks, but it's an alternative to the neonicotines. And if you were to make this objection, then people would allow the neonicotines, which is much more damaging. So I think we have to avoid that. This other substance, lufenol, the MRLs, are safe for consumers, and there aren't any risks for fetuses or pregnant women. And even if this were no longer to be allowed in the EU, the member states do have a transitional phase until the end of June, until they receive the necessary data. So, if we would, let me emphasize this, in the EU we have a legal framework which we have to respect. We can't make random interference in this procedure. And I think it's in the hands of the member states and the consumers whether they use this. So we're going to reject both of these objections. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to SND and Maria Arena.
Merci.
Thank you. I wanted to speak about the objection from the Green Group. I don't want to go into the details of what my colleagues have already said, but I wanted to hear from the Commission, particularly when it comes to independent studies on the persistent and bioaccumulative characteristics of lufenuron, as well as the allegation that it could be toxic to fertility. Another particularly concerning point and a reason invoked to increase these authorized levels being pure commercial logic would lead to our standards then adapting to those in Brazil or China. Again, it is unacceptable that our MRLs should be seen by the Commission only as barriers to trade. They have been set primarily to protect the health of European consumers. And when it comes to tolerance levels for these substances, they should remain at these minimum detection levels. So I find these proposals extremely worrying in the context of Mercosur negotiations. We're seeing that even without a trade agreement, industry is working for us to lower our European standards. So I'm wondering what would happen if we actually achieve a trade agreement with Mercosur or China. And that is why our group will support the objections submitted. Thank you.
Merci. Frédéric Ries pour Renew.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Again, we have two objections on the table. I'll start with the first, which is actually the last we heard about by Madame Melin for chlorantraniliprole. Now, I agree with the point she made about the legumes and vegetable proteins, which is really a successful industry. This is used against larvae which ravage lentils, chickpeas, and we're talking about detection limits below which their presence is so weak that they can't be detected. However, 22 member states use other product to protect potatoes, vines. Madame Melin also raised the aspect that this substance would be an alternative to neonicotinoids that kill bees, which have been banned in Europe. That's not the case everywhere, particularly not in the US, and they're the ones submitting this request. So Renew will vote against that request. The second resolution contests the increase of MRLs for lufenuron for grapefruit. This is a completely different case. This is a substance which has been banned in the EU for 2 years. We've heard about its toxicity, its long-term persistence. And so that would be completely countersensical to increase MRLs for these high-risk pesticides that have been banned here. It would also create an unfair situation when it comes to competition against third country farmers who can use substances that our farmers cannot. Here we're talking about Brazil, who's made the request. They are the #1 sugarcane producer in the world, and we can see that allowing this would have huge impact on biodiversity. Voting against this objection would go against all our biodiversity aims, our principles when it comes to human health, and it would show that we have in fact learned nothing. So Renew will support that objection. Thank you.
We move to ECR, Alexander Vondra.
Yes, thank you very much, Pascal. As usually, I oppose both the objection resolution and reject their claims that the implementing measures does not comply with the regulation on a maximum residue level of pesticides in or on food in feed of plant and animal origin. As I have stated before, why should these MRLs be considered differently to comparable proposals put to this Parliament in the past, which have successfully passed the scrutiny period? The MRLs have been found to pose no unacceptable risk for human health or the environment, an assertion supported by a comprehensive amount of data by the Commission, by the Member States, and by EFSA. Moreover, the majority of these MRLs actually support uses within the EU for essential crops that cannot be cultivated to the required quantity in the EU, and minor uses for specialty crops where farmers already contend with a diminished crop protection toolbox. Niche crops that can include, for example, berries in my country, cauliflowers or broccoli for German growers, carrots in Finland, celeries and fennels in Italy, and many others. It is therefore vitally important that we support the Commission proposal in order to continue ensuring food security, competitiveness, and consumer choice. If Parliament decides to wield its veto, this unabstantiated trade restriction will create new legal uncertainties and economic damage for food and feed value chain and be in contravention with WTO SPS agreement principles and standards set by the Codex Alimentarius. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. I don't have any other speaker. Okay, so we can move to the Commission. And as usual on these topics, Klaus Behrendt.
Yes, hello. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Yes, indeed, we have again two objections against MRL measures that we believe have been proposed in full alignment with the legal provisions, following exactly the procedural steps and based on the scientific advice of EFSA, and therefore fully in line with the implementing powers of the Commission and with the aims and objectives of the MRL regulation. Let me start by reacting to Ms. Melin's comments concerning chlorantraniliprole. Here, I would really like to insist that, contrary to what Mrs. Melin considers, we have exactly followed the scientific advice from EFSA for all the substances in the proposal, and whether they are packaged in one proposal or submitted individually, the scientific base is there, and we are acting in line with the advice that we have received from the Food Safety Authority. As pointed out by Ms. Schneider and by Ms. Ries, the substance is approved in the EU and products containing it are authorized in 22 member states. And if there had been an application for domestic use on pulses, which is in question here, the outcome of the assessment would have been exactly the same. So the fact that this is linked to a use in the United States makes no difference to the outcome of the scientific assessment, and a domestic MRL for this use would have been possible in exactly the same way if there had been an application. For lufenuron, the situation is indeed a bit different today. The substance is no longer approved. But at the time when the application was submitted, about 2 years ago, the substance was approved in the EU. As pointed out by Ms. Schneider, there are still grace periods ongoing in several member states, which will end in June this year. And thereafter, the Commission will examine all the existing MRLs and also the import tolerances and values coming from Codex, like the one that we are discussing today, to see whether it can be maintained or not. And in that consideration, we will then also take into account the properties of the substance, such as the persistence to which several of the speakers have referred. I do not share the view that EFSA has not examined the toxicity for human health. On the contrary, for every reasoned opinion from EFSA on MRLs, the full toxicology package is considered, including for effects on reprotoxicity and other long-term and chronic toxic effects, and EFSA has concluded that the MRLs are safe. So, taking into account that the application was submitted at the time when the substance was approved, the advice from EFSA is that the MRLs are safe and that the procedures and obligations in the regulation have been correctly followed. We see no reason to withdraw this proposal. And lastly, as Mr. Vondra pointed out, if the objections are adopted, this will have knock-on effects for many other substances, including ones that are urgently needed also for domestic uses in the EU. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we will vote tomorrow as well on the objections. I will now close this morning session by declaring officially the vote open at noon up to 1:45 on the oral question on soil protection. And of course, you have received all the material and all the information through your email box. Thank you and see you this afternoon.